Hello and welcome to the Morningstar Investment Conference in London. I'm Emma Wall and I'm joined today by Professor Matthew Goodwin to talk about Brexit. Hi Matthew.
Hi.
So we've just heard that the rise in populism is not going away anytime soon, and yet it was such a shock to the institution, particularly here in London, when we voted for Brexit not that long ago.
Well, indeed. I mean, I think the interesting macro question for all investors and analysts is when you look at things like Brexit or you look at things like Trump or what's happening in Europe, do these shocks represent the fact that we're at the end of a period of volatility and change, perhaps as older generations are replaced by sort of younger, millennial, tolerant generations, you might argue? Or are these events actually telling us that we are nearer the beginning of a period of change and volatility? And I certainly think it's more the latter than the former. And part of the problem that in our debate is we have too much groupthink in the sense that people are not interrogating thinking to the extent that they should be. If you look at the Brexit debate, you know, in my industry, we had a big survey 2 weeks before the referendum that asked 300 opinion pollsters, academics, and journalists to predict the result. And over 90% said Remain. And the betting markets basically said Remain, and the telephone polls said Remain. And we, you know, if you go back, you know, now and you look at actually, well, the evolution of public opinion among those key groups, working class voters, people without degrees, you know, people who felt that they were being squeezed by globalization and so on. It was quite clear that the levels of distrust, levels of concern over those issues, and also the issue of immigration, could easily deliver a shock, but you know, groupthink took over, and we weren't interrogating our own modelling and our own thinking as much as we should have been. And my big stick, if you like, is let's take a step back and look at those long-term trends, but let's look at how actually the West is changing more generally.
And of course, the decision-making behind both Brexit and, you know, the rise of Marine Le Pen in France, although she didn't win, and indeed Trump, is it's not about an economic market, an economic argument rather. You know, a lot of the confirmation bias that you talk of, we had definitely as a financial journalist, I was privy to a lot of that. But our discussion were about what's good for the economy, what's good for a free market, instead of being about emotive issues, which is what rise of populism really is about, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we've had a very curious disconnect between the financial world and the political or social science world. And we've got one community that I think is still very much focused on rational choice and that this is about economic costs and benefits. And we've got another community that has been saying, well, concerns over identity and value conflicts are as important, if not more important, than people's sense of, you know, economic performance. And we need to now actually get into a place where we're having these conversations together and we're actually bringing evidence on both sides together. Because it's certainly true, there are aspects of the Brexit moment and the Trump moment and what's happening in Europe now where economic perceptions of loss or relative deprivation are important. They aren't the whole story, but they are there. But we also need to think about value conflicts within society, where they come from, how they're exacerbated. And we also need to think about generational changes as well. And unfortunately, much of the debate at the moment is focused quite narrowly on those short-term factors. You know, what's happening in the markets right now, what the latest political leader said about X, Y, Z, and that distracts us from the longer-term trends.
And you said at the beginning that you believe that we're at the beginning of a seismic shift towards this more populist politics. What does that mean both in terms of Brexit and indeed across Europe, where we are still closely aligned?
Yeah, so what I have in my mind is I don't necessarily think that populist parties are going to be winning every election and sort of, you know, we're not going to have Brexits every year across the continent, but we are going to have quite a sharp rightward drift, and that is partly a response to the rise of these populist challengers. The mainstream parties, I think, will increasingly adopt much of the populist policy platform and rhetoric, especially parties on the centre-right. The centre-left will increasingly struggle because it doesn't do very well on issues that relate to immigration and identity, and it refuses to accept that these are anything more than just about economic scarcity and is being punished accordingly. But more generally, our politics will become more volatile and fragmented. We know that rates of volatility generally are going up. We know that rates of fragmentation, the number of parties that are campaigning and contesting elections, are going up. And we know that voters are becoming what we would call, as political scientists, de-aligned from the party system. We know that they are less likely than they were in earlier decades to say, I'm loyal to the mainstream. And that means we're all going to be navigating this period of a more sort of fluid period, chaotic, slightly unpredictable period together.
Professor Goodwin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Emma Wall from Morningstar. Thank you for watching.